Hello, my name is Denise Bayron. I'm a knitwear designer and sewing pattern maker, and my brand is Bayron Handmade. Today, thanks to Pop-In at Nordstrom, we're going to be making a blanket together. I received a kit from Nordstrom. It's the Wool in the Gang Little Take Me Home Blanket Kit. Inside my kit, there were 8 balls of crazy sexy wool, these 25 millimeter circular needles, the little pattern booklet, even a darning needle, and a label so that I could sew it on when my blanket is complete. Let's get started. The supplies that we received in our kit are especially beneficial for beginners because the really plush yarn and the large needles mean that we're going to get through knitting this blanket very quickly. Beginners will see their results quickly and feel motivated to continue with the project. My first step here is to show you how to make a slip knot, how to make the first stitch. And so find the strand that is in the center by digging in the center of the ball here. You'll find the end of the strand. Then we'll take our strand and we're going to make a loop. You're going to take the tail and fold it over the working yarn. And the working yarn is the part of the yarn that's attached to the ball. Make a little loop in your palm and then fold the loop over the working yarn, over the strand that's attached to the ball, and pull the strand through. You've now made an adjustable knot that's called a slip knot. You can pull on the tail to tighten the slip knot. Our next step is the cable cast on. Place your slip knot onto your needles. Then take the other needle, we'll call these the left needle here and the right needle here. You're going to insert your right needle into the slip knot from left to right so that your needles are crisscrossed. Then wrap the yarn around your right needle and pull that strand through. You should now have 2 stitches, one on the right and one on the left, and the goal is to place this right stitch back on the left needle. We'll do that by giving it a little twist and placing it on the left needle. The next step is interesting because it's different in that we won't be working directly into the first stitch. Instead, we'll be working in between these 2 stitches. So, insert your right needle in between stitches 1 and 2, and everything else is the same. We'll wrap the yarn around the right needle and pull that strand through so that you have a loop on your right needle. Place that stitch back onto the left needle, and now we have 3 stitches. Let's do that one more time. Insert your right needle in between stitches 1 and 2. Wrap the yarn around your right needle. Pull the strand through. Then give it a little twist and place it back on the left needle. Now the pattern calls for casting on 55 stitches. I'm going to cast on a few for this sample, and I'll see you when you've cast on 55. Now that you've cast on all of your stitches, you should have something that looks like this. All of the little knots are at the bottom, and you're holding your yarn behind the needle. We're now going to take our right hand needle and insert it into the first stitch, and we're going from left to right. Wrap the working yarn around the right needle and pull through a loop. The difference is that now we're sliding that stitch off of the left needle and letting it rest on the right needle. Let's see that again. Insert your needle into the next stitch, wrap the yarn around the right needle, pull a loop through, and slip it off of the left needle. Again, insert the needle, wrap your yarn around, pull a loop through, and slip that stitch off of the left needle and onto the right. Continue doing this until you have worked all of the stitches in the first row. We're at our last stitch and we're going to knit that last stitch. And now our instructions tell us to turn our work. Turning your work literally means swapping hands so that now the empty needle is in your right hand and the needle that's full of stitches is in your left, and you're literally going to turn your work so that you're ready to work the second row of knit stitches. When you knit every row and you turn your work at the end of every row and knit the other side, you will get something that looks like this. It's called garter stitch. Garter stitch is unique in that it has no wrong side, meaning it looks the same on the front as it does on the back. At this point, you will have knit 12.5 inches from your cast on edge. Mine is obviously much smaller, but we're at the point where we need to add a new ball of yarn. You will have cut a tail that's 8.5 inches long. What's interesting and really cool about this pattern is that we're not only adding a new ball of yarn, but we're also making our fringe along the edges of the blanket as we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my blanket to the side for a second, and I'm going to take my working yarn, the yarn that's attached to the ball. I'm going to measure 8.5 inches, and then I'm going to make a little loop as such. Then I'm going to take the tail that's attached that I just cut from my blanket, and I'm going to insert it into that loop. I'm now going to slide the little loop pretty close here to my first stitch and tighten it. And by doing that, making it nice and snug, I have at the same time created my first bit of fringe and added a new ball of yarn. And now we're ready to continue knitting as we've done up to this point. I've knit a few more rows on my blanket, and let's say for the sake of this tutorial that I'm done knitting my blanket. I'd like to show you how to cast off or how to finish your blanket by getting all of the stitches off of your needles. So let's set up as if we are going to knit the final row. And what we're going to do is call casting off. So you're going to knit the first stitch and slide it off of your left needle, and now it's on the right needle. Knit the next stitch. Now you have 2 stitches on your right needle. Let's identify them as stitch number 1 and stitch number 2. The goal now is to use your left needle and pull stitch number 1 over stitch number 2 and slide it off of your right needle. Would you like to see that one more time? I'm going to knit the next stitch. I have 2 stitches on my right needle. Use the tip of your left needle to grab stitch number 1 and pull it over and off the edge. And now you're down to 1 stitch left on your right hand needle. Continue doing this until you reach the last stitch, and I'll show you what to do once you reach this last stitch. Okay, we have 1 stitch on our left needle and 1 stitch on our right. Let's knit that last stitch and bind it off. So we're going to use the tip of our left needle, pull stitch number 1 over stitch number 2. And now we have 1 final loop left and our left needle is empty. What we're going to do is we are going to cut our work here. Then you are going to thread the tail through this little loop. and pull all of your work nice and snug. And we have bound off all of our work. Our last and final step will be to use our darning needle to weave in our tail. You may wonder how you're going to get this extra plush yarn into this tiny needle eye. I'll show you how I do it. Fold the strand over your needle so that it's nice and tight, and then wiggle the eye over the folded strand. And now you can easily get it in through without splitting the plies, without getting stray hairs. Okay, now we're at the upper right-hand corner and I want to weave in this tail into my work. So although there's no, let's say, hard rules about how to do this, this is generally the standard way of doing it. What I'm doing is I'm pulling my strand towards the first row. And so this was my bound off edge, and this is my first and second row here. And what I want to do is I want to weave it in the direction of the knit stitches so that it's fairly invisible. So I'm going to enter, I'm looking at these purl bumps. These little bumps here are called purl bumps, and I'm going to follow the direction of the knit stitches as I worked them originally. So I'm going to enter this purl bump here. And notice I'm going into another purl bump in the row below it. So my needle is almost angled to the right, and pull it through. Then I'm going to follow the course of the strands as they are. So I'm going to come around, under and around, and back into the purl bump where I started. That's pretty invisible. Now I'm going to go over. So I'm following the thread here and going under this purl bump and back under the purl bump that I started. So it's almost as if we're weaving it in, following the direction of our stitches so that it's invisible. Again, I'm going to follow the threads here. I see this little U shape. I'm going to go under this purl bump, back under this, the one that's angled. And obviously I'll do the same thing over and under. For the last time, I see this little U shape. I'm going to go underneath this purl bump and underneath this purl bump and weave it in. And for my last one, to make sure that this like floofy edge doesn't kind of slip out at a later time, maybe when I'm washing my blanket, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I don't go underneath this purl bump, but that I actually split the plies. I'm going to go through the wool. And what that's going to do, it's going to make the wool kind of mesh together so that it locks in permanently. I've got this tiny little edge, so you'll see me do this again, get the wool on my needles. And now I'm going to go through the strand to lock it in, through the strand of the purl bump and pull it through. And now if I give it a little tug, once you've locked it in, you can take your scissors, your little yarn snips, and trim that tight. And there you go. You've woven in the tail, and it's fairly invisible. Kits such as this Wool in the Gang blanket are convenient for beginners and for people who live in small homes because everything you need is provided inside the kit. I, for example, live in a tiny house in Oakland, California, you are looking at my whole house. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please stay in touch with me by checking my website, byronhandmade.com, and by following me on Instagram at byronhandmade. I'm also currently writing a design and lifestyle book under the working title Handmade Wardrobe for people who want to make their own clothing and their home decor with a focus on sustainability. Thank you so much for the opportunity to work on this project with you. I thoroughly enjoyed sharing my love of this craft with you and our time spent together. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again. Bye-bye.